Hello, New York Giants fans. Welcome back to the Everything New York Giants podcast with New York Giants fangirl. I'm your host, Adrianna. In today's episode, I'm recapping the final installment of Hard Knocks, the last episode, and also talking about the second week of training camp. So let's get right to it. Hard Knocks, again, I loved it. I know that some of it was most likely staged, but again, that behind the scenes look that we got to see is so different than all of the other Hard Knocks that we've seen so far. So I really enjoyed it. And this episode specifically, they're focused on draft weekend, and again, getting that inside look I thought was great. So some things that I wanted to talk about with this episode. So the Giants knew that picks 1 through 3 were going to be quarterbacks. In the last episode, we found out from Elliott Wolf, who is with the Patriots, that they decided to stay put and they were not going to move out of the 3rd overall pick. The only way they were going to do that is if they got a slew of picks, which Joe Schoen felt like was not the right move for the Giants at the time. And Elliott even said, you know, if we had a quarterback, this would be a different story. So obviously, as we all know, they ended up taking Drake May. The Giants were really happy that at 6, both Odunze and Neighbors were on the board. They weren't sure how things were going to go with the Chargers. And Joe even said, you know, there were a lot of rumors and rumblings going around that they liked those wide receivers and, you know, they lost some players this offseason, so there was a possibility that that's what they were going to choose. So when they ended up taking Joe Alt, Joe Schoen was thrilled. And when he puts in the pick for Neighbors and they call him, you can just feel the excitement in the building. It was so obvious how thrilled everyone was to get Malik Neighbors. And I have to be honest, you know, when I saw some of the clips of him during the draft, I was like, oh my God, this is not going to look good. But I do feel like it was a little bit better than I expected. You know, I think that a lot of these guys go through a lot of emotions at once. You know, you get the phone call, you hear it's New York, you know, you're probably excited, you're probably a little bit surprised. Now you're thinking, oh my God, I went from Louisiana, moving my whole life to New York City, and, you know, there's some questions at quarterback. So I just feel like these kids are young too. He's only 20 years old. So I don't know. I just kind of thought it was going to look way worse than it was. So I'm glad, you know, as soon as he got to the Giants building the next day, he seemed more engaged, more excited. So, and you could just tell how excited everyone else was. And I think that that really translated to him once he got here and realized, this is my future. I got drafted in the top 10 in the NFL. I'm in one of the biggest markets. I'm going to have sponsorships and all these amazing things aside from playing for this historic franchise. So I felt like, you know, he got more excited as time went on. And I still feel like that when I've seen him at camp and stuff. He seems like he's locked in and he's ready to go, which of course we love to see. Also, something that I wanted to point out is that the Giants got 2 calls, one of them from the Jets and one of them from the Colts. The Colts offered their 15th overall pick, 46th pick, and next year's 2nd round, and Joe decided he didn't want to go that far back because the guys that they loved were Neighbors, Odunze, and Brock Bowers, and he felt like if they moved back to 15, they weren't going to get any of those guys. And like he said, if they're not getting a quarterback, then they need a weapon for Daniel, and that was obviously what they ended up doing. So when he answered the Jets phone call, it was also very obvious. Like as soon as he hung up, he's like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So I'm glad that they stayed put. Obviously very happy with the Neighbors pick, and we'll talk about this when we talk more about camp, but the guy is unbelievable on the field and he's just going to be really fun to watch. So I'm feeling a little bit like Joe is feeling. He was like a kid in a candy store after getting Neighbors, and I just feel like we have a lot of excitement as Giants fans. So then they move along to day 2 the next day. They really liked Kool-Aid and some other corners, but obviously the way that things fell and the fact that they gave up the pick, the early 2nd round pick for Brian Burns, they didn't end up getting any of the corners that they wanted. They were patient, but they loved Nubin, who was the first safety off the board and was one of their top picks outside of corners. So I think it was pretty obvious how they all liked Nubin. You know, when Joe Schoen talked about him, he said he's got a ton of ball production. He's a ball hawk, good leadership, good tackler. He's got good range. And according to their studies, I thought this was really interesting, that Schoen said according to their studies, the ball hawk and a ton of ball production is something that translates well to the NFL. And I just, this is stuff that we've never heard before from the front office. When Dave Gettleman's doing his pressers, he's not talking like this. So I really love how in depth they went when they were talking about these players and how much they loved them and why they loved them. After watching all this tape, all the scouts that were involved, having coached them at the Senior Bowl, what they really liked. And as they got to know these guys, they felt like across the board, they were all good options for the Giants. Similar thing when it came to Drew Phillips. He got good grades from all of the college scouts. They spent good time with him, which they really liked. He's a good locker room guy. He's got good skills, quickness, and movement. And the Giants felt like it was hard to find a nickel guy, but he was going to be it for them. And Drew Phillips has done pretty well at camp. Again, we'll get into that. But so far, so good. And then finally, on the day 3, the final day of the draft, Joe Shane specifically referenced Justin Tuck as being a 3rd-round pick. They also talk about Michael Strahan and some other amazing Giants players who were later round picks. So just because they're a 3rd, 4th, 5th-round pick, you can't automatically rule them out. They talk a lot about listening to the board and being patient, and this is specifically what they talked about in regards to drafting tight end Theo Johnson from Penn State. They have a lot of conviction from the guys who coached him in the Senior Bowl and guys who spent a lot of time with him that they loved him. They loved his explosiveness for his size. This was something they talked about a lot. He's 6'6", over 200 pounds, and the fact that he could be as explosive and move as well as he did for someone with that size, when they talk about what they saw in person, they were so impressed by that, and that's one of the reasons why they really love Theo Johnson. Next up is Tyrone Tracy. They loved the versatility of him. He was a former wide receiver, so he's got good hands. And they had good analytics for him on explosive play per touch, and he ranked high out of all of the running backs in the draft. The last guy, linebacker Darius Mosso, they didn't really talk a lot about. I've seen him a bit on special teams, which was something that they talked about with him. So I think that, it was a really good look into the draft process. Getting to see their board and the way they coded the different players with different colors was very interesting. Again, something that you don't really see. So I just thought the whole process, the way it went down, I know we know how the draft ended up going, obviously, at this point. But again, to see the way that they really talk through and all the work that they did and the prep that goes into picking these players, I think that's what makes it even more hard to accept that it looks like Evan Neal is not going to be a starter on this team, which I think a lot of us are probably happy about. But to me, it's also like you put all this time and effort and research and work into these players, and, it's hard to obviously tell what's going to translate and what's not. But, to see all the work that goes into it and just know that Evan Neal's a turnstile is just a bummer. So either way, I loved it. They ended the episode by talking about that it's the 100th year of the Giants. They talk about, they finally unveiled the uniform. So I think that the way that they ended the episode and the way that they ended the season made me really excited for the upcoming season, because you could just kind of feel that energy that everyone else in the building is really excited about it. So like I always say, it's the off season. It's the time to be optimistic until they actually prove it to me on the field and show me otherwise why I shouldn't be optimistic about them. So with that being said, let's talk about week 2 at training camp. I was there Monday and Thursday of this week. I'm recording this Thursday night. So there was a practice Tuesday and there's one more practice tomorrow. Tomorrow they will be back in full pads. So Monday of this week was the first day that they were in full pads. They've just been in like shoulder pads and regular pants. So Monday, Tuesday were padded days, Wednesday off day, Thursday shells, and then Friday back to the pads. Next week, I'm assuming with the Lions here, they're going to be full pads on both days. And, the first day of pads was kind of funny because I think you kind of could tell that, they're like starting to get used to things. And Dable said, who was it? I think one of the offensive linemen, he said, you could tell they're getting a little anxious that like it's starting and it's time and the pads are on and like we're ready to go. He said that one of the players walked into their meeting in full pads, and he was like, I could just feel his anxiousness and tell that he was like so ready to go, that he already had his full pads on to go sit in a meeting. And to hear that from Dable, I just thought was hilarious. Speaking of Dable, he's been calling the plays. He is very hard to recognize at camp because he looks so different. He's so tan. He's half his size. And when you look at him compared to the players, I just am like, I cannot believe that he is like literally half of most of their size. So new weight, new Dable. We'll see how that continues, but he seems like he's running the practices quite well. And from what I have seen, and we know that one of the things that he's supposedly working on this offseason into this year is to be less explosive on the sidelines. And you can say it's just camp, he should be reining it in anyway, but we have seen his fiery, emotional side, and I haven't seen that from him this year. You know, I've seen him high-five Jones, and, you know, he goes over and talks to players and seems excited to talk to them and stuff like that, but I haven't seen him lose his shit, which has been good. So maybe, you know, he's finally figuring that out. Maybe it's because there hasn't been an obscene amount of mistakes. I'm not so sure, but I think if he can continue that on during the season, that's something that's very important. So something to look out for as the weeks go on and the season continues. So let's start with the offense here. So there have been good days and bad days for everyone. I think the biggest thing coming out of this is that there's so many fans who just hate Daniel Jones and don't want to see him play anymore. And whatever, everyone's entitled to their opinion. But you know what you're not seeing on Twitter is that Daniel Jones sucks and Drew Lock is amazing and needs to be the starter. So I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming that that's a good thing, but also it just means that all of the quarterbacks have had good days and bad days. Drew Lock has had some amazing throws. He also has had some horrible throws. Same thing goes for Jones and for DeVito. So I think it's just the nature of camp. And when you look at someone like Jones, who has not really been involved in team drills and doing a lot of football stuff because he's been rehabbing from his injury, it shows a little bit, right? He's a little rusty. So today was his best day that I have seen of camp so far. The first few series, he was on the money, beautiful balls, great targets, hit the players in stride. Jalen Hyatt with a beautiful catch. Wandale has had some really great catches. Neighbors obviously has been all over the place and has had amazing catches as well. And Darius Slayton. So overall, you know, it is hard to tell with the offense, and the offensive line has been rotating again because there's been some injuries. John Michael Schmitz is dealing with a shoulder injury. It's the same shoulder that got injured during the tush push last year, but it's not the same injury. They have not disclosed the injury other than it's the same shoulder. At first, Dable said it was soreness. You don't miss multiple practices because of soreness. So I don't know if Dable will ever tell us what the issue is, but with him being out, we have seen Morrissey get snaps at center, John Runyon Jr., and Greg Van Roten, who they recently signed, and Austin Schlottman. So from what I saw today with Van Roten getting the center snaps, the offensive line looked better. The Andrew Thomas versus Brian Burns matchup is really fun to watch. I mean, you're watching like two of the best go at it. And, you know, like they all say, iron sharpens iron. It sounds like that's a big thing in the locker room because I've heard multiple players say it, and they're right. So I think that's one of the best things, right? Like when we get to the defense and we talk about Neighbors versus Banks, it's the same thing. Like watching these guys go against each other every single day is only going to improve both of their game. So I think what has been really interesting on the offense has been the running back and the wide receiver, because I thought the wide receiver position was going to be very clear at this point who was going to make it, and that there were going to be other guys who were going to stand out more. So I know there's a lot of people who love Bryce Ford-Wheaton. He has gotten barely any snaps with the ones. I have not seen him in there probably at all. I've seen Isaiah McKenzie in with the ones quite a bit. I've seen Isaiah Hodgins in with the ones. Obviously, it's the top four guys, Neighbors, Slayton, Hyatt, and Wandale. No surprises there. Allen Robinson has gotten some snaps with the ones. But I really thought that, you know, we've seen Gunner with the ones too, but I just kind of thought, like, we would see guys like Bryce Ford-Wheaton, and I know he's coming back from the ACL injury, but he had such a strong camp last year that I really just thought we'd see more of him than we are. And he's had some good catches in with the 2s and 3s, but he has not been lighting it up like he was at this time last year. So I think that's kind of how it goes. Obviously, every year is quite different, but very interesting. I would say if I had to guess right now who are going to be the 6 or 7 wide receivers, obviously the 4 that we already talked about, I really think Isaiah McKenzie is going to make this team. They also can use him on special teams, which is going to be a benefit for him, no doubt. And then I think that the other one is probably going to be Isaiah Hodgins. I think that ultimately it will be between him and Gunnar. Gunnar is obviously making this roster. They're going to use him on special teams, and I've seen him in with the 1s a little bit, and he's been in with the 2s and 3s used as a wide receiver. So if they keep 6, it'll probably be between Gunnar and Isaiah Hodgins. If they keep 7, I think the 2 of them make it, with Isaiah McKenzie being the 3rd. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. Something to continue to watch in the final week of camp. Next, let's talk about the running backs, because Eric Gray had a really slow start to camp, and I was thinking over the last few days, I really don't know if he's going to make this roster, because he cannot be used on special teams after everything we saw from him last year, where then you've got a guy like Dante Miller, known as Turbo, who comes in here and is just lighting it up. He's catching the ball, he's explosive, he's breaking through tackles, what would be tackles, because obviously they're not hitting in camp, and he just looks, he is having a really strong camp, and today was actually his worst day. I think he dropped 2 balls, but outside of that, he's looked really good and has emerged as a front runner. Obviously, we know Devin Singletary is the number 1. There's no question marks there. He's been great. Excuse me. The other one is Tyrone Tracy, who we know, obviously they spoke very highly of, but I really just thought that I wasn't so sure if he was going to get a ton of playing time, knowing that they also drafted Eric Gray last year, and I thought they loved Eric Gray. Excuse me. But I am feeling like if they pick 3 running backs, there's a very good chance it's not going to be Eric Gray. And I think preseason will be the determining factor here, but as camp goes on, if this pattern continues of Turbo being the beast that he is, getting reps with the 1, 2s, and the 3s, versus Eric Gray, who has also gotten reps with the 1s, but his reps with the 1s haven't been as strong as, say, Turbo's and Tyrone Tracy's have been. So again, another position group to watch. I do feel like the running back is one of the stronger positions on the team. And something else about Turbo is he can be used on special teams where Eric Gray cannot. So we saw a lot of Turbo in special teams. We saw Gunnar, obviously, Isaiah McKenzie, and Tyrone Tracy was also used in special teams. And Tyrone Tracy has really good hands, so I think, you know, that he could end up being the number 2 back here, depending on how Turbo goes. Marcy is back, so if you hear some panting, she has joined me. I will talk louder. So overall, the offense, you know, surprise, surprise, my biggest concern is the offensive line, and it's not really about the talent, it's the fact that they keep rotating it. And last year, that was the issue over and over again, is they keep rotating it. And I understand that John Michael Schmitz is out, and when Morrissey has been in, his snaps have not been great. They've been high, they've been low, they've been not consistent. So I just am a little concerned that the rotation continues, and I just hope that by the time camp is over, that they have settled on their 5 and there is no question marks. And the way that it stands right now, I think it should be, from left to right, Andrew Thomas, John Runyon Jr., John Michael Schmitz, Greg Van Roten, and then Jermaine Illuminor. I don't think there is any question that Jermaine Illuminor is going to be the starting right tackle throughout the end of time, unless he gets injured. He has been at right tackle since day 1, and I don't really see that changing. And Evan Neal is still off on the side doing his individuals. He's not done a single team drill. He has not done at all any of the 11 on 11s. He's just not ready to go. And I think that as more time goes on, it's, in my opinion, because time continues to move on, camp is almost over, we're going to get to preseason. Under no circumstance would I throw him in at right tackle over Illuminor. If you don't want Illuminor to play that much during the preseason, fine. I don't think they're going to play the starters a lot. Then you can put in Evan Neal, fine. He needs the help and he needs the reps. But like week 1, he is absolutely not starting. I will be shook to my core if he is the starter. So I don't think that's going to be the case. So I want them to get out the rotations now and figure it out by preseason. And again, I think next week against the Lions, we'll have some better ideas about that. So let's talk about the defense. I think with special teams, there's not really that much to talk about. Graham Gano looks fine. Gillen looks fine. They have a third kicker on the roster. And, you know, they've had a lot of guys rotating. Today we got to see a closer look and a better idea of what the new kickoff rules are going to look like, having the two guys in the backfield and ready to return the kick. So it's going to be interesting. I kind of like it. Actually, the more that I watch it, I like that there's two options there. So we'll see, but not really much to talk about with special teams. So let's talk about the defense. Nacho has been getting most of the reps alongside Dexter Lawrence. I don't really think that that's a surprise to anyone. Ryder Anderson has gotten a lot of reps with the ones as well, especially today. Saw him a lot in the mix. Burns and Kayvon, not worried about them. They're going to be amazing. I have not seen a lot of Aziz in with the ones, which I thought is interesting because I thought we would get more of a rotation there. And ultimately, I think that Burns and Kayvon are obviously going to play 90% of the snaps. But, you know, if Aziz is healthy, he can be explosive and an impact player. I'd like to see him involved more. So I'm curious to see how that develops. Something that I thought has also been really interesting, too, is that Aziz is being used on special teams, which is not something we have seen from him up until camp. So very interesting. I think they're kind of using that as a way to help him make this roster, or a way to see if he's good on special teams, that maybe he should make this roster as opposed to just being the third pass rusher. So very interesting there. Someone else who's been used on special teams is Gervarius Owens, who again, up until this point, has not really been used there. Gervarius Owens had 2 interceptions in camp on Tuesday. He's been mostly in with the twos, and he's looked pretty good. Let's continue on with the safeties. Jalen Mills has been off to the side. He has some sort of injury, so we haven't seen a lot of him. Jason Pinnock and Dane Belton are the starters as of right now. Newbin obviously was dealing with some sort of calf, so now that he's back, he was in more of the rotation today, but I'm curious to see how that develops. But I think ultimately week 1, it's going to be Pinnock and Belton. Belton is a ball hawk. He's been around the ball a lot. He's had a couple interceptions so far for the Giants each year. So he's a guy that I'm excited about. I think him and Pinnock will probably keep us in good shape. Where we might not be in good shape, surprise, surprise to everyone, is the corner position. Tay Banks is Tay Banks. I'm not worried about him for a second. I know there's a lot of conversations about he's getting burned by Neighbors every single play. First of all, that's not true. He's had a few pass deflections. And second of all, maybe Neighbors is just that fucking good. Has anyone considered that? That they picked Neighbors number 6 overall because they believe that he's got the capabilities and the talent-wise of a Justin Jefferson and an OBJ. So maybe he's just that fucking good, and we should all be like, hell yeah, we finally got a wide receiver who's actually good and can make plays. So I'm choosing to believe that that's what it is. I'm really not that worried about Tay Banks. I just genuinely think that Neighbors is that good, and I think that Banks, as camp has gone on, he has looked better and better. So I think he's going to be fine. What might not be fine is the spot opposite him, because as of right now, Cordell Flott is getting most of the snaps. Nick McLeod has also been involved in the outside, and both of them are hit or miss. Keeping up with Neighbors for those two is a lot more challenging than it is for Tay Banks. So I am curious to see those guys go against Amon-Ra and go against some of the guys on the Lions, because I think that's going to give us a better idea next week of, okay, are these guys just getting toasted by Neighbors because Neighbors is way better than them as opposed to just Banks, or are they really not that good that it doesn't matter who the wide receiver is? So, you know, they've gone against Hyatt and Slayton a little bit, and, you know, both of them have been okay. Not great, not terrible. So again, something to watch as time goes on, as camp goes on. Last up, let's talk about the slot corner. We've seen Darnay Holmes there a little bit. Luckily, not a lot of it, more so in with the twos. We have seen, what's his name? Drew Phillips in with the slot. He's done quite well. Nick McLeod has been in the slot rotation. I think that Phillips is probably going to end up winning the starting job there, because I think that there could be a good chance that McLeod ends up on the outside. But I saw a lot of guys in rotation with Shane Bowen, and I think that that's just going to be the move, is that all of these guys are going to get rotated in and out. Obviously, Banks is not going to be playing the slot, but I think when you talk about the other guys, McLeod, Flott, and Phillips. I think those three guys could be rotated between the two. Now, the Giants did bring in a couple other veteran corners, but none of them have gotten snaps with the ones. Now, the new guy that they brought in, Mario, was on the team for the first day today. So we'll see if his snaps end up improving and continue developing. So again, more things to just keep your eye on if you're going to camp, stories to watch as time progresses. The last guy I want to talk about is Isaiah Simmons, because I think we're going to see a lot more of him in way different looks than we have seen from him in the past. And I actually wanted to read this tweet from Carl Banks because I think it's, hearing it from someone like Carl, who obviously is way more technical and can speak to this better than I can, I think this is really interesting. So he says, the Bowen effect. I see a different Isaiah Simmons. For the first time, as I have seen in his career, he has a clear, focused, and defined role. He's locked in, his reads are clear, and his movements are free. And I think that today was Isaiah Simmons' best day. He had 2 pass deflections, which ended up being interceptions, and both of those might have been with the 2s, but either way, he's seeing reps with 1s, 2s, and 3s. He's been all over the place, and I think, Carl is really onto something here. I really think that they love Isaiah Simmons and that he's going to make this roster. He's also been on special teams a little bit. So I think last year we were all begging to see more Isaiah Simmons, and he just wasn't really fitting with what Wink was doing. I think this year is completely different, and we even heard Bowen talk about him during Hard Knocks, is that he likes Simmons and he wanted to make it work for him this year in his system. So he's a guy that I think we should all continue to be excited about. So I think that covers it for the second week of camp. I will be back next week. I'm going to recap the Giants-Lions joint practices, which are Monday and Tuesday next week, and then I'll preview the preseason game, which is on Thursday. So stay tuned for an episode next Wednesday. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, share with your friends. We are in football season now. It is time to laser in, get focused, and get excited about this upcoming season. So make sure you follow along. You can follow me at New York Giants Fangirl on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And there is a lot more content coming your way. And like I said, I've been at camp almost every day. So follow along on my Instagram stories, because I've got great video of Jones and Neighbors. I've got some good running back videos. I had an awesome one of Turbo the other day. So some exciting stuff to watch. I have one of the interception videos that I'm going to post later. So make sure you guys check it out, and I'll be back next week. Thanks for listening.